Welcome, everybody, to this week's bonus episode of Left Reckoning. I'm joined, as always, by Matt Leck.
Howdy.
And today we have a very special guest, TMBS crew, and our good friend, Dominique Rémy, who is a filmmaker. And a little bit later in the show, we'll be talking about the film project she's been working on. But she is also a reproductive rights advocate. And she has been gracious enough to join us to talk a little bit about the fetal heartbeat law here in Texas, what that's going to mean for all of us going forward, challenges, things like that, and also zooming out a little bit and talking about reproductive rights and its role in the class struggle and its relationship to racial injustice in this country. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you're joining us because we've been covering this a lot here, what's been going on here in Texas. I mean, it's been something that, understandably has been affecting me personally and my family. It's very frightening, but it's very frustrating because the political landscape here sort of trends in a certain direction. And I don't think that the Democrats have done the best job at being the opposition party throughout all of this. But I wanted to focus a little bit more on the kind of nuts and bolts and what this means for folks, instead of just spending all my time slashing at the Texas State Democratic Party, because I do that a lot. But just to bring people up to speed, Texas Senate Bill 8 essentially bars abortion after 6 weeks, and it does so in a really onerous way. That not only is it sort of targeting the medical procedure, but the enforcement mechanism encourages anybody, private citizens, to be able to sue people who are providing abortions, people who might even just be helping somebody. So literally, you could just drive somebody to a clinic, and if it's past that time, you could be liable. And puts a bounty on people's heads around $10,000. And I just want to share this real quick and sort of get your first thoughts on it, Dominique. But basically, the news peg here. But there's a few things that we're going to talk about, but one of the major things has been that the first target has been found in this, and the San Antonio doctor appears to be the first sued under the new Texas Heartbeat Act. And it should be noted that the folks who are suing the San Antonio physician who admitted to performing abortion in defiance of the law, so this was very much a purposeful act on their part, and the people who have targeted them have been folks from out of state. And that's obviously not the worst aspect of all of this, but it is sort of interesting to see just all of the people that they're trying to bring into this. I mean, could you talk about what this bill sort of has meant for you, what your general thoughts on it? I mean, obviously we're opposed to it, but I mean, this is a big moment in the fight for reproductive health.
Yeah, it is. What's funny is I believe I was still either in undergrad I was still in undergrad. And my background, I come from an evangelical background and went to Catholic school from kindergarten to undergrad. I remember there was like a pro-life club that we had, and we also had religion class, and we talked a bit about abortion. And I remember really having a political consciousness around it with, as I want to say, State Senator Wendy Brown, is it?
In Texas.
Wendy Davis?
Wendy Davis, yes, in Texas. So like that was like my first like kind of coming out of like, I guess like a little bubble where I thought pro-life club was every high school had that to, there's like fights around abortion clinics and reproductive rights. And obviously things that I wasn't entirely exposed to. And it's so funny that like my first political consciousness with regards to reproductive rights was Texas. And now it goes back to Texas. But yeah, my initial thoughts when this happened was, it was really hard. It was really hard because I've done some reporting with another clinic out in Tennessee called Choices in Memphis, and they have been, talking about like these trigger bills, basically the bill. And what that means is these bills are set in place to basically trigger a reversal on Roe versus Wade. And Tennessee had their whole back and forth. And it cut really close at the time when I was speaking with them. And I remember feeling like the tension then, and then seeing the bill in Texas, like actually seeing it go through, I thought like, oh, it can actually get worse. Like it can get worse with these types of legislation. It really isn't just talk or to try to scare people straight into, not going into clinics or anything, or trying to get clinics to preemptively shut down. They mean it. And that was that was like a gut punch to me. And the reaction, I think, is rightfully very angry, but I'm angry at the reaction, especially from more liberal or democratic folks, where it's like, well, what are we going to do now? Or like, where were you to prevent this? Because you can't just be like, oh my God, this is happening. We have to we can't just scramble in these moments, especially with something like abortion, which is so timely, literally. It's all about timing. They're using timing and weaponizing timing in the bill. So to, say, oh my goodness, what are we gonna do when you're in power, an opposition party? That's very frustrating to me, and it does show me the limits of more mainstream reproductive rights fights. Although I do want to say all hands on deck is absolutely necessary and needed. That doesn't mean I'm not going to critique them. But yeah, when I saw the bill, I was really upset. A lot of emotions about it. And, now that this definitely does set a precedent for other states around the area who want to, enact these laws. And going back to the clinic that I was telling you about, Nikia Grayson, who's a nurse midwife there, she said she would get clients driving up from Texas up to Tennessee. And I'm terrible with American geography, especially the South. So forgive me, David, but I think that's a pretty long drive.
And it
right?
depends,
From Texas to Tennessee.
It's a very long drive, and obviously it depends on where you're coming from too. I mean, but even if you're just coming from, the northeastern part of the state, that's still 9-10 hours, right? Which is
right, because it's the second largest state in the country.
Other than Alaska,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big place, and that's one of the things. I mean, I don't want to get too fixated on geography, but it seems like obviously there is like a class thing, and we'll get into that later. But I was seeing some people making the point, I think it is true, right, that wealthy people aren't as threatened by this because they'll just go here and there. And it's like, well, yeah, they can afford plane tickets and stuff like that. But like, if you're living in, I saw somebody saying like, oh, well, a rich person in Houston can just go to New Mexico. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's a trip. And again, that's not the worst like aspect of this law, but it's just like, the barriers there are huge. But I wanted to note two things and hear your thoughts on it, specifically about this bill. One is that the politics about it that is sort of horrifyingly strategic from the right, is that like there's almost been this kind of like political truce around abortion, right? Obviously it gets people really worked up, and it's a big political issue. But they're not going to be able to. Everyone's always assumed they were never going to be able to ban abortion. So what the primary strategy in the South was to make it really, really hard. And Texas is an example of that. They made they were pushing facilities having to have like hospital grade cleanliness regimens and things like that, which is absurd for the kind of services that they were performing. So obviously there's places that it's harder to get it than others, but what's what's really cool about this bill is it's not just like sort of restricting it in that kind of technicality by not having the state be the enforcer of it.
Mhm.
It prevents the kind of typical strategy that the left or reproductive advocates would use, right? Which is a court pushback, right? And there's certainly going to be court pushbacks here, but it's a lot more difficult to sue a random, person for a lawsuit than it is to sue the attorney general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. And I remember seeing that as like, this is sneaky. This is pretty sneaky.
It's really sneaky, and it's one of the, I maybe like the point I'm trying to like really hit home is that, there's been such a defensive posture, understandably so, because these rights are under assault from reproductive advocates and from the Democratic Party in these states, while the Republicans and the right have just gotten really, really effective at trying to find ways to get around these laws and these things that we sort of thought were settled.
Yeah, meanwhile, the Democrats piss around with a parliamentarian.
Yeah. You see, but this also just like makes me think about organizing strategies. Clearly, the right, they're organized. They're organized, obviously, ideologically, that they want to make abortion as hard as possible until they can remove it from the land. And they're very clear-eyed in how they want to do it. And then contrast that with us, being set on our back heels with this bill. It's like, well, they can do the things that you're just saying, is like they can add these things and kind of like weasel a way around, like you were saying, it's easier to sue a person rather than the attorney general.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, the attorney general, it's easier to sue than like the state than it is to just prevent against like thousands of lawsuits. Yeah. And then that's the thing too, is you can just become completely inundated, right? It's not like you get one and you're done. You can just be completely overwhelmed with jackasses everywhere. But maybe before we get, because I can see where this can go as we talk about the general politics about it. Let's get some of the technicals, not the right word for it, but could you help our audience understand, for example, or maybe not even our audience, the refrain that I hear from people here who are like anti women's healthcare is this, well, 6 weeks is plenty of time to get this procedure. Could you sort of just help people understand why that is just absurd?
Yeah. 6 weeks, no, it isn't plenty of time, one. And it's, to me, I feel like, oh, sorry, did you hear the ding?
No, you're good.
Okay, sorry. So to me, I think anyone who is keeping track and knows that they are pregnant prior to the 6 weeks, so this is like prior to the 6 weeks, is someone who's trying, is someone who's paying attention,
right?
And would keep the fetus. So, the cycle, I would say, like, especially for people who may suffer from irregular cycles, I would go 6 weeks without any indication of a period. And that would just be like, well, that's probably, I'm having an off cycle. I'll let my body get to it. And it really is until like maybe the 10th or even 13th week that you'll start to be like, wait a minute, something's not right. And then you'll start to get like more symptoms, or the symptoms will be more prominent depending on who you are. But just like prior to 6 weeks is so hard. It's so hard. So like, really conservatively speaking, in terms of timeline, you would have to know within a month, not even the 6 weeks. You would have to know within the month, and then to make all the preparations within that month.
That's the second bit of it too. So like, even if you are discovering, within a 4-week period, right, from becoming pregnant and realizing that you're pregnant, because of the state of healthcare here, because of the onslaught against abortion clinics here. It's really difficult to, for example, get into a center for folks, right? It's like, it's very feasible, for example, that people aren't going to be able to get into a facility in time, even if they knew 5 weeks, right? To get in before the deadline.
Right.
There's just a lot of hurdles across the country, but specifically here.
Right. Right.
And I imagine even for women, like knowing what they want to do come to that point is something you also don't want, like an NBA shot clock on the floor. Okay, now you know you're pregnant. Are you going to have it, or are you going to terminate the pregnancy? Like that's something that is under like a complete like gun now.
Right. Yeah. Like I do think this is an aspect that isn't just really talked about. And I don't want to make it seem like it's such a agonizing choice for everyone, but there's emotions around it. Like there's emotions around it. Like once you find out this thing happened, like with any kind of like surprise or emergency, you do need some time to process.
And even if it's not emotional, it could be just calculations.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. Yeah. There's like so many into it. And it's like they knew that like 6 weeks was abhorrent enough to like, you know, to trigger the libs. But just like maybe makes enough sense for it's like, oh, it's not like within the week that we're saying to do, you know what I mean? They like just made it like kind of reasonable to someone who's not paying attention.
Right. Yeah. Feel lucky we gave them 6 weeks sort of thing, basically.
Exactly. It's just like, this is absolute nonsense. 6 weeks. I take 6 weeks to answer emails.
And I mean, we wanted to also make sure that there's been another story here in Texas that has sort of been buried in regard, like this is just going to make it even more difficult for folks, correct? I'm going to put this up on screen right here for folks. This is in The Guardian. New Texas law bans abortion-inducing drugs after 7 weeks pregnancy. By the end of the year, let me get back to the... even before the legislation known as SB 4 was signed, Texas had some of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country, amid requirements for 24-hour waiting period, ultrasound imaging, admitting privileges for doctors, parental consent for minors. Another controversial bill, SB 8, was passed by Texas legislature in May that sought to stop abortions in the state beyond 6 weeks. Could you talk about this kind of additional hurdle that Abbott has put up front?
Yeah. To me, it feels like they're really like crossing their T's and dotting their I's and making sure there's no real wiggle room. Because I remember prior to this story coming out, literally the day that this was announced, and my feed is filled with a lot of reproductive justice advocates, activists, birth workers, and mutual aids, and a lot of people were rightfully collecting money to bulk up on these drugs, or giving resources to people who, like, you can order these drugs even like from Europe and stock up on them just in case. Yeah, it's that whole thing that you were reading, it's like they are making it very bureaucratic, so you have to have like all of these steps prior to even ingesting it, and it's not just a one shot kind of pill. You take one day, and then you take the rest the next day, and then you have follow-ups to make sure that the procedure was done well, and tests as well. So it's really not so much like a one and done kind of procedure. So within 7 weeks, if you wanted to get like the mail order drug, one, there's mail. Two, then and if you want to go to clinic, you have to do the whole doctor visits, and to do the whole doctor visits, and then to make sure you have time off too to take this. Because again, I was saying it's like a 2-day thing, and then there's follow-ups. Yeah. So this is more involved. Even though they like gave you a week in extension, 7 weeks. So like, let's say in the 2 weeks that you found out and you had to do all of these things, especially if you're a minor, you need to get, permission from a guardian. And then you also have to technically get permission from the doctor. And I say that is technically permission from the doctor because they make you do a sonogram. Like the doctor does not need to be involved in this way. The doctor can just administer the drug, but they want the doctor to show you what's going on and be like, okay, well, now that we have this visual proof, we can move forward. Or, if the doctor is ideologically against it, the doctor could say, look, what's going on in, your uterus. I don't feel comfortable administering it. And that's something that really should not be an aspect for doctors to consider, but it's written in code. And even though like doctors should just care for patients regardless of what their own personal beliefs are, it doesn't seem like that is something that is enforced. What's enforced is telling the patient, based on the law that's backing me up, you're not going to get these pills.
Yeah.
So then like you're like doing this whole rigmarole for the pills, and that's time eaten up, and then you're like, I'd rather just do the procedure. Then you have to do a whole nother thing for the procedure.
I mean, it's just it's one of those things. It's like when you talk about abortion, like at least most people think obviously personal decisions and personal experiences and stuff, but it's something that we all understand now to sort of be political. But it can sometimes just be so amazing when you walk back from that. Remember, like this is like a medical procedure that we're just adding all of this insane, hoops to jump through that make something that's really safe, something that could be really accessible into, one of the more difficult things that you can do. And there's so much that I want to get to, but I'm curious what oh yeah, sorry, Matt.
Can I just stick on the out-of-state medicine for instance? I don't want to get too sidetracked onto Matthew McConaughey, but for a guy that 3 hours ago CNN posted an article saying he's looking at a gubernatorial run, and also acted in a movie, The Dallas Buyers Club, about like sourcing medics. He's been silent about the issue. I just want to peg that as far as I know, unless you've seen something.
Oh no,
that is a good point.
Yeah, I know people have been making a big deal about that, but the whole thing you got to understand here is that it looks like Beto's going to go, but it's like super late in the cycle and nobody had even announced that they were running for governor. And this was like an absurd thing that we were even like waiting with bated breath to hear if fucking Matthew McConaughey is going to come out in full force against the law. And I don't want to get too down on, focus too much on Matthew McConaughey, but his politics are really, really stupid. I like him a lot as like a person, as a cultural figure here for the city of Austin, but he literally is like a middle of the road guy. And his whole political perspective is based on aphorisms. I kid you not, like his interviews are amazing. It's just like, America just needs a good pep talk from him.
I really think he wants to make apolitical political.
Yes, exactly. It's just like we all just need some advice and bring everybody together. But the thing is, though, while Matthew McConaughey has been silent, and we're still, there's certainly been a lot of opposition. And when this law passed, I had gone to a huge rally out in front of the Capitol, and I came back really moved. I was very frustrated that we're in this situation, but very moved that how many people are going to really sacrifice and fight to make sure that people have access to healthcare. So there's always has been a lot of people pushing back, and I'll maybe get into the dynamics of that in a second. But I did want to note, because this is the thing that's interesting about the law, is the politics of it are fascinating. Because obviously Republicans, like they run on being against abortion, but this law is just so egregious. Not only in the sense of it like banning abortion, but basically the sense of like surveillance, right? That we're all like sort of watching our neighbors to tattle on them is so horrific that you're even starting to see pushback from those on the right. And this is a bit that Matthew Sitman noted about anti-abortion leaders, right? And we'll get to his commentary in a second. But this is from the New York Times. Anti-abortion leaders in Texas said they never expected many people to actually file lawsuits, which is just bullshit. I'm thinking
the fuck you do it for?
Would be too costly and onerous. These out-of-state suits are not what the bill is intended for, right? As if it would be any fucking better if some guy from Waco was suing this doctor, right?
Yeah, we want to enrich our local abortion bounty hunters.
Said Chelsea Human, the Texas State Director, National Legislative Advisor for Human Coalition, anti-abortion group that said it had no plans to file a lawsuit against the physician, Dr. Alan Braid, or to encourage others to do so. Matthew, makes the same points that we were sort of hitting at, which is the blow is simply put an absurd lie. It's exactly what the bill was written to allow. It's part of the design. There's no doubt about that, and I think it's very worthwhile pointing out. This isn't a criticizing making that point. But I do think it is interesting that when you're looking at polling, when you're looking at the reaction, like even Republican voters are actually very unhappy with this bill because it's just so cruel that like even the anti-abortion groups are like sort of walking back from it a little bit.
Right? I mean, I think a lot of like anti-abortion people were sold like a sweet lie about how this could actually be done in a way that everyone would be happy somehow. I honestly think a lot of like religious folks are delusional enough to think like, I frankly, I have a lot of people in my family that are like that. Like, we'll just do it in a way that everyone understands we're saving the babies, like, and it's just going to be fine. And then you actually see, well, we're gonna have to deputize everyone to sue people for having abortions. It's like, I don't know, can we do it the nice way? Like, there's not a nice way to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's funny, Matt. My family is similar. Actually, I wouldn't say they're pro-choice, but they are definitely lean a little bit more pro-life. Definitely with the Bernie campaign, surprisingly. I remember when Ohio was teasing out a heartbeat bill as well. And, folks in my family were like, wait, but what if someone needed it? And like, that's the question. They're like, wait, what if someone needed it? Why is it so restrictive? And it's like, yeah, okay, you're getting it. And it's not even need based on medical, because like that's when they stop. They're like, someone probably needs it for like a ectopic pregnancy. It's like, okay, let's get a little bit closer to just people need it. It doesn't matter what the reason is.
They can decide.
Just need it. Yeah. But it was really interesting and when Bernie was talking about it during some speech, I remember my dad being very like, yes, Bernie. And I'm like, interesting. So it is interesting that even people who would be pro-life or Republicans are pissed about this, because I know people in my family and Matt's family as well are just like, wait, this is this, nobody can be happy with this bill unless you're a zealot.
Except for exactly. Except if you're a zealot, which are a lot of the people who have their ear. And like, I just don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. I'm not saying that these people who are running the organizations here have had a change of heart. They're having to walk back on it just because they're realizing how unpopular it is, and they don't want to be associated with like the response to it.
They got what they wanted, and now it's like, oh crap.
Right? Yeah, like now we have to do PR to sort of it's like to make sure people aren't too upset by our victory party.
This is like a conservative version. I remember Johan Hari in his book about legalizing drugs in Uruguay. He was like talking about like there's a scary moment where they started decriminalizing everything. It's like, crap, what if this actually doesn't work and does exactly what the conservatives say it was? Like, we'll have to take responsibility for that. I don't think the right has that kind of reflective capability.
So this I want to zoom out in just a second, but this might sort of get us there, because I do think one of the things that is notable, right? Again, I'll just say this really quick for folks who haven't heard me talk about what's happened here within the state of Texas, like the politics here. The 2020 election was a disaster. You had all the Democrats running around talking about how not only were they going to have a good year, like Biden was going to win, they were going to sweep the state house. Before the day before the election, I think there was 5 Democrats who announced that they were running for Speaker of the House of the state house here, because they thought they were going to have a clear majority. Not only did they not reach that level, they lost seats. And they lost seats across the board. And, don't have time to do the in-depth analysis, but I'll tell you, primarily it was they are completely leaned into this suburban strategy, going for super wealthy folks, and have left behind their people. They also don't run on much. They run on not being Republicans, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Most people aren't really attracted to just like a negative in that sense.
It's like, but you're Democrats, and this is Texas. Like,
so there's a lot of political work to be done. But I'm sort of curious what your thoughts are on this, Dominique, and if this is too much, let me know. But it is interesting to see how abortion is used politically, both by like the right and the left, right? I'll just say, like, my family is really liberal. Like when you're talking about Wendy Davis, like my whole family was there occupying the Capitol with them. This is an issue, rightfully so, that they're very passionate about. But as is, restricting abortion on the right. And I would be curious, beyond it sort of being used to sort of like rile up the vote, like the people who are actually engaged in the on the ground work of making sure that people have access to abortions, the people who are really advocating for this stuff and paying attention to that. I do think that they're not the same as the people on the other side, if that makes sense, right? The people on the other side tend to be wealthier and more connected. I mean, could you talk about that dynamic a little bit?
Yeah. So I know you're talking in context of like Texas, but this is something that I found to be a rift or a tension, I guess, in these spaces. And not to just divert to my film, but like this is one of the reasons why I wanted to make my film or get into the reproductive conversation, reproductive rights, justice, and health conversation. Because it had seemed for a really long time, Roe versus Wade has been around 40 plus years, and we know abortion, we know the fights for abortion, we know that it's hopefully here to stay. But there isn't so much of a discussion about all of the other things that we've touched upon about like a class and race, with regards to reproductive rights in general, or just reproductive health across the scope, not just abortion. And I found that a lot of the folks that I follow are reproductive justice oriented. And I also noticed that people don't realize the difference between reproductive rights and reproductive justice, which is reproductive rights is solely about this fight that we're talking about abortion rights. And reproductive justice is much broader. And one of the tenets of reproductive justice is where we want to make sure that people can parent in dignity or choose not to parent and still have the bodily autonomy to do so. And those folks are organizers on the ground, especially in Texas. There's several reproductive justice activists on the ground and organizing around this bill, well, not around the bill, but around making sure that this bill doesn't do any more damage or go up the ladder with regards to the Supreme Court. But yeah, I've noticed that, the more moneyed people that you're talking about, more moneyed, and of course they're, blue, vote blue no matter who, are the ones who would absolutely, send in a tax write-off for Planned Parenthood. That's a no-brainer. Like Planned Parenthood it's like a safety charity. No one looks at it, unless you're really fringe, no one looks at it as something that's like bad. Presidential candidates are on board with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood presidents go to be, Democratic operatives. And these are all people who are more moneyed. And I will be frank, more white. so white upper class women, and then reproductive justice, which is actually a framework that was started by Black and Latinx scholars in 1994, the eve before, I forget the conference, the specific name of the conference, but it was about universal healthcare. And this was during the talks, Clinton administration about universal healthcare, which obviously didn't pass and failed dismally. They were sounding the alarm then about maternal mortality and infant mortality, 1994. And they took out a full page ad, and it's Dr. Loretta J. Ross who led it, and one of the signatories is Angela Davis, Dr. Angela Davis, to talk about the more broader aspects of reproductive justice with regards to race and class. And yes, abortion is important, but all of these other things are important as well. And now we have people organizing around saving our right to choose, and adding onto it that the same forces that restrict your right to choose are the same forces that lead to poor outcomes in birthing for birthing people, and infant mortality, and poor education, and environmental negligence when it comes to raising a family in specific neighborhoods that are Black and brown. Like, all of these things are included, and not just the right to choose. I feel like that was a lot.
No, that's extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's probably not a clear-cut answer on this. I just would be interested in your perspective. When you see the differences in like morbidity rates, maternal morbidity rates, and all these things of like lack to access, do you think that these structurally exist because of, is there a disciplining aspect to this, or is it just sort of like indifference, right? Like a kind of negligence to those communities from, our system? I know it's probably just both and, but I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. And I've been reading about this, especially in my research, but I think you're right. I think you're right that it's a bit of both and I think, there is an aspect of, well, we want to like make it seem like, although they'll talk for days on end how much of a blessing a child is, and it very much is a blessing to those who want that blessing. They also want to kind of make it into like, well, you did this thing and you're going to have to live with the consequences. And that's the removal of the abortion. And in that, they also don't help. So it's like, you're going to live with the consequences of this action that you did, which is basically people having fun and enjoying themselves and, being grown adults. In most cases, they're like, okay, well, there's no access to abortion, and you're gonna have this child, and then we're also not gonna do anything to help with regard with your pre, during, and postpartum care, and to raise this child, and that is a very punishing effect, I think, that lasts generations.
This reminds me of Matt Brunig focuses on this. It's called the success sequence, and you get all of these different kinds of guys. Oh shoot, I just lost it. But this one guy says degree, job, marriage, baby, right? And as if this is sort of like some oracle to following a good life, and they try to impose it on people. And I think like the discipline comes from, they want this to be the normative sort of way you go through life, and anyone who doesn't go along that, they want to, like you said, discipline as much as possible. They get them out of the paint. This is all the spoils are going to be for the people that followed this, what is it, degree, job, marriage, baby thing.
Yeah, it's very now that we're like talking about it out loud, I'm like, this seems really bootstrappy. I know we talk about boots like pulling yourself up from by the bootstraps with regards to like pure economics and like people who, you know, I don't know, live in trailer parks or like homeless people and are like, oh, just pull yourself up with the bootstraps. But like this is also kind of bootstrappy, which is like, well, now that you're a parent, figure it out. You're gonna try to get into that, like you were saying, that into that success matrix, purely because of the conditions we set aside. Mm-hmm. It's not a force of nature or anything. It's literally the conditions are made for they make to put the pressure on people to be parents.
Yes, and I love that point. It's like these are, you know, human made things, and I would just like, you know, and like I asked you this because I sort of wrestle with it because I try to sometimes zoom out and think like structurally, like materially about these things. I think like a good bit of the anti-abortion stuff in the United States is like politics in the sense that like you have to incorporate like a religious group, right? And it's very passionate. So I think that's one of the big drivers. But also forcing certain communities to have children when they can't is a really great discipline tool for labor, right? Because there's nothing that makes you say yes to a boss more than knowing you have a hungry kid at home that you need this job, right? Absolutely. And I think that that is a big, there's a lot of reasons why, you know, like poor communities in this country really struggle with access to these things. But I think that, you know, one of the reasons that it's just not a big thing that like capital itself, that the state itself is like, we need to fix, is because it can be sort of beneficial to I don't know, labor discipline. But in this last couple of minutes, I really, I'm so excited. This project has been, you know, being developed for a while. It's looking, you know, developing in a really exciting way. Could you talk about your film for our audience? People might be
absolutely. Yeah, so this has been a long time in the making, ever since I was actually in film school. And I won't date myself, but it's been a really long time. And of course, the pandemic hit us right in the middle of our production. But I am working on a feature-length documentary called Canary, because I truly feel that mothers of color, particularly Black and Indigenous mothers, serve as the canary in the coal mine for pretty much what you were talking about structurally, and not just structurally in terms of capital, but just every facet where it's just deteriorating in this country. A lot of these mortalities, around 60%, are preventable. People have been having children since the dawn of people, and it doesn't really make sense to think about it in terms of like, well, why can't Black people survive childbirth? It's more like, well, what's going on within these communities that, you know, engenders such disparities and these tragedies, and that's where we're focusing on it from a reproductive justice lens. And I've been talking again, like with reproductive justice activists and advocates and birth workers, about, you know, what they see on the ground and in their communities, and also with folks. We are going to be interviewing a young mother who had a really close call, had advocated for her right to be checked out, and, you know, doctors really were like, we don't think it's that big of a deal, and then ended up developing congestive heart failure, and examining, you know, those dynamics as well. But that is really what I want to do with the film, is two things. I do want the 30,000 foot view of what's going on, but also to weave in like tapestries of like rich vignettes of these lives, of people who are both working with birthing people, families of birthing people who have passed, and birthing people who are about to enter this new journey in their lives. And I remember when I first started this project as a Black woman, who's not really that young, and still really wants to be a parent at one point, I'm just like, oh my goodness, am I going to survive? And just hearing the headlines and seeing the numbers, it's very frightening. But what I want to do with this project is to not use those numbers or the figures or the statistics to scare people, but to galvanize, pretty much, push people, because we can really change things. Like there's like a couple of things that we could do really in the outset if we had the political imagination and the political will to do so, that would save lives. Like one of the things that I actually had in mind to mention about Texas was the Medicaid expansion. Medicaid, to go quickly back into abortion, people who are on Medicaid because of the Hyde Amendment cannot just simply get it unless it's a case of rape, incest, and you know, it's life-threatening. And also, same people on Medicaid, Texas, when I was doing my research in May, decided not to expand Medicaid for this term. So people who want to give birth and, you know, are on Medicaid will be subjected to poor conditions. And Texas actually has a review committee for maternal mortality and morbidity, interestingly enough. And they did a study in 2013 that found that a lot of mortalities occurred with it like 43 days to the year mark of the birth, within that window. And the CDC also confirms that the mortality window is a year, and not just when, you know, someone is giving birth. And they also saw that 90% of those mortalities were preventable. They were either infections, hemorrhages, or heart conditions that could have been monitored more if they had better access to care.
People don't have access to healthcare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the same system. Medicaid restricts your autonomy, and then also when you do want to be a parent, if you have it, you can't have the best parenting experience for yourself and for your child. But in the film, I want to explore this more and talk about like all the ways in which like Medicaid expansion or rather universal health care would be tremendously helpful in cutting the rates, as well as something like parental leave for a year. And these things we can absolutely advocate for. So the film is definitely going to be bringing us into lives of folks who have been affected in one way or the other. We will be having people to speak more to the structural aspects of it, like the historical aspects of like why gynecology is just so ill-suited for women of color, especially Black women, because gynecology was born out of experimenting on slave women. And you know, just the economic breakdown of, you know, giving birth and the fact that we are profiteering off of these types of
huge bill.
Yeah.
Which is like our foreign audience just is always just so shocked when they hear.
Right. Yeah. I saw one story. This unfortunately, this couple like lost their newborn and then was tacked on with a bill for $27,000. And these are all things that I want to bring together because they're all connected. I want people to understand that like there's a historical aspect, there's an economic aspect, and there's also political imagination and will that we need to collectivize around. And that's why I say the mothers of the Canary, because if no one's looking out for the mothers, how bad is it going to be for us who aren't parents? Like, it's all the same health system that we're operating under. Of course, it's tiered. People who have more money will be left to better care, but that's not the majority of us. Yeah. And I want us to fight for our mothers because we're fighting for ourselves as well. And I want really to be a very solidaristic aspect to this, not just like, oh, Black and Indigenous mothers are dying. We know that ever since 2017, when there was spread after spread, when, you know, Beyonce and Serena talked about their near death experiences, people have known this. Like I said, even in 1994, they've been sounding the alarm for this. So we know this. We don't need more awareness. We need more action. We need more action. And I'm hoping that, you know, with the camera lens, I'm able to push for that and advocate for that on behalf of birthing people. That was a lot.
That's great.
No, this is it's really great, and you know, we're lucky to have you on the show. We're lucky to have you out there advocating for folks. How can people follow the work?
Yeah, so we are at Canary _ film on Twitter, and you can find me at Canary Filmmaker, all one. There's no underscore or anything, just Canary Filmmaker on Twitter and on Instagram. And I believe it's Canary Film on Instagram as well. Yeah, please follow the work. We have some stuff that will hopefully be rolling out pretty soon. We are just getting back into production. Of course, we wanted to be safe with a pandemic, and we're going to be going into people's homes, and sometimes these homes have young children in them. So it is taking a while. I know there's people who, you know, in the Left Reckoning, TMBS, and even Majority Report universes who are eagerly awaiting this. I know you all are. There's a lot of crossover. So I'm so grateful for your patience, and I can't wait to show you all what we're working on and continue to work on.
Well, thank you so much, Dominique. Hope to be able to talk to you again soon sometime.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Dominique.